Broadcasting from our New England studio, Solutions Review is proud to showcase Secureworks in the Solution Spotlight, an inside look at enterprise technologies.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to this Solution Spotlight featuring Secureworks and focused on the NIS2 Directive and how Secureworks can help. The NIS2 Directive is a legislative framework designed to enhance cybersecurity across the European Union by establishing a high common level of security for network and information systems. Under NIS2, essential and important entities must adopt appropriate, proportionate, technical, operational, and organizational measures to manage cybersecurity risks. This is as much a compliance issue as it is a technical one. So today, we have brought in two experts from Secureworks to walk you through the best ways to approach the NIS2 Directive. And joining us today from Secureworks is Marco Ratto, Data Protection Officer and Global Contract Director, and Ritesh Singhai, VP of Global Solution Engineering. Marco, Ritesh, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for hosting us, Doug.
Thank you, Doug. Looking forward to the session.
Well, as am I. This is clearly, as I said, got a lot of moving parts. It's an important compliance and technical question, and it's always great to have folks with the kind of experience that you both have. Before we get going, though, why don't you just share a little bit more about your background and that experience? We'll start with you, Ritesh.
Doug, I've been in the industry for 25 years. It's just been an amazing journey. The first 10 years were around architecture, engineering, software development. That's where I started my career. I've lived in multiple continents, works across the clients, building their cybersecurity programs. So it's been a very fulfilling and rewarding job. For the last 4 or 5 years, I've been doing this role as a global solution engineering VP. And majority of my time is in front of the clients, looking at their security programs, looking at their compliance programs, and how we can assist and take them through that journey. And NIS2 is something that we are hearing a lot more about. We have this is a common topic across our clients, and I think this is a great discussion for us to have today.
Yeah, Marco, how about a little bit of background around your journey?
Yes, I've been with Secureworks for over 10 years at this stage. Before that, I was working in the IT industry and the communication industry. For Secureworks, I am privacy officer and I'm also contract director. So with my team, we support customers and we negotiate contracts. So we liaise with customers on a day-to-day basis. And as a privacy officer, I liaise with customers and trying to keep compliance with privacy for both Secureworks and our customers, and discuss how to evolve and how this slide evolves.
Well, so let me set expectations for everybody. Marco and Ritesh are going to have a fairly detailed presentation on the NIS2 Directive, and again, how Secureworks can help, but a lot of the moving parts that are going along with regard to compliance and the technical issues surrounding NIS2. If you have any questions, and we certainly would encourage you to, please send them in. I will gather them up here. I'm going to have some of my own, and we've reserved some time at the end, so stick around for a Q&A that we will walk through probably the last 15 minutes or so of the program. But for now, Marco, I'm going to hand it over to you. I know you have a detailed presentation, and then I'll jump back in when you're wrapping up, and we'll join in on that Q&A session.
Okay, thank you very much. As anticipated, today we'll give you a very high-level overview of the NIS2 Directive and how Secureworks can help. As often happens when a member of a legal department is involved, we need to start with a disclaimer. Our disclaimer is that Secureworks is not licensed to provide legal advice, and therefore the content of this presentation should be construed as such, but should be only for informational purposes. Okay, in the last few years, we have noticed a clear trend where countries across the globe have been enacting laws to mandate strong cybersecurity measures. These laws vary country to country and region to region, but they have common objectives. The objectives are to protect critical infrastructure, to safeguard personal data, to maintain national security, and to promote consumer trust in digital services. The Network and Information Security 2 Directive, the NIS2 Directive, is part of this trend. It's also part of a wider EU regulatory framework, including the original NIS Directive and the Digital Operational Resilience Act, the DORA regulation that applies to financial institutions. The NIS2 Directive expands on the obligations under the original NIS Directive and on cybersecurity obligations across Europe, and it goes far beyond privacy compliance. As all directives, it is enacted at European level, and then it needs to be transposed by the member states within the EU into national law. The member states were supposed to do that by the 17th of October 2024, but as I'm sure is not a surprise to most of us, most of the member states are late. And so up to now, we have a handful of countries that have already basically received the NIS2 directive, such as Belgium, Croatia, Hungary, Italy, Latvia, and Lithuania. But the European Union is initiating infringement procedures against 23 member states. Having said that, as I was saying, some states have already received the NIS2 directive. It is applicable. More states are coming in the next few weeks, we understand, and therefore covered entities should comply with the directive at this stage.
Yeah, Marco, it's quite interesting the way NIS2 directive has been defined, because a lot of obligations are also on the member state adopting a cybersecurity strategy for the country. Formulation of CSERT, they can handle the volume of incidents that they may be handling. They need to think about creating a competent authority where somebody can see the implementation of NIS2 across the nation. So overall, the involvement of how a member state needs to work, as well as sharing of best practices and building a secure Europe, that's really interesting, because I think that this regulation goes way beyond what I've seen before. You have similar opinions?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we think about it, directives are aimed by the European Commission more at member states than at business opposite of or entities. So the directive tells the member states what they should do. If we look at the NIS2 directive, the vast majority of the content is aimed at the member states. So they have many obligations. So they need to set up structures that allow them to deal with what the covered entities will do. So they need to have teams that will receive, for example, the reporting. They need to have ways of allowing the covered entities to register with them and communicate on a continuous basis. So the NIS2 directive is active now. It is implemented in some countries, but in many countries, even the one that have already implemented the law, it will become functional with a flow of information between entities and local authorities only with time. And we'll look about some of these details in the next few slides. Thanks for that, Ritesh. So let's have a look at the covered entities under the NIS2 directive. So the directive defines two sectors, the sectors of high criticality and other critical sectors. Sectors of high criticality cover entities that provide services that are vital for economy and society, and where a cybersecurity incident could have significant disruptive effects. And we can refer to these as essential entities. And the other critical sectors cover entities that operate in sectors that are not as critical as the sectors of high criticality, but where the entities still provide services that are important for economy and society. And these are important entities. There are other criteria for the differentiation between essential entities and important entities that have to do with the size of the entity, the number of employees they have, the number of customers they serve, and the revenue they operate under. And but let's say to look at these two type of sectors, I think it's quite useful. So the sectors of high criticality are energy, transport, banking, financial market infrastructures, health sector, drinking water supply and distribution, digital infrastructure, ICT service management, public administration, and space. Other critical sectors are postal and current services, waste management, manufacture, production, distribution of chemicals, food, production, processing, distribution, manufacturing of electronics, computers, pharmaceutical and medical devices, digital providers, and other sectors detailed in Annex 1 and 2 of the NIS2 Directive. So as we can see, the NIS2 Directive covers many sectors and therefore many different types of entities. So the net that is cast by the NIS2 Directive is very, very wide. Looking at the NIS2 Directive, in my opinion, the NIS2 Directive is relatively well written and simple to understand. So if someone wanted to have a reasonable understanding of what the directive is and its requirements, my advice would be to go and read it. If on the other hand, someone wanted to have an overview of just the obligations under the NIS2 Directive, my advice would be to go and read 3 articles. Article 20, Governance, Article 21, Technical Requirements, and Article 23, Reporting Obligations. And in these 3 articles, we see basically the main obligations under the directive. For what concerns Article 20, Governance, it introduces senior management responsibilities. So, as I was saying, the background of the NIS Directive stems from the NIS Directive, which basically started introducing cybersecurity obligations, but it wasn't great in terms of applicability. So now with the NIS Directive, the directive introduces this concept of responsibility for senior management of covered entities to ensure that who is guiding and driving the covered entities as a stake in this directive as is incentivized to drive it. So senior management needs to approve the cybersecurity risk management measures that are taken by the entity in order to comply with Article 21 technical requirements, which we'll look at in a minute. It needs to oversee the implementation of the risk management measures and can be held liable for the infringement. And senior management also needs to follow training to enable them to carry out the responsibility under Section 1 and 2 here and identify the risk and the cybersecurity risk management practices, and must offer similar training to relevant employees within their entity. So this is basically, let's say, a new concept under the directive whereby senior management really has specific responsibility and can have personal liability if they don't follow through. For what concerns Article 21, cybersecurity risk management measures, in this article, the directive lists the minimum cybersecurity measures that each covered entity has to have in place at all times. So covered entities must have policies on risk analysis and security information systems, incident management systems, business continuity systems such as disaster recovery and crisis management, supply chain security management measures, basic cyber regime practices and security training, policies and procedures regarding the use of cryptography and appropriate encryption, human resources security measures, and the use of multi-factor authentication, continuous authentication. But I like to focus our attention on Section 5 and 6 of this slide. So under the directive, each covered entity must have security in the acquisition, development, and maintenance of the network. And such security must allow them to identify, manage, and report against vulnerabilities. And under Section 6, each covered entity must have policy and procedures in place that allow them to continuously evaluate their cybersecurity risk management measures. So under Section 5, a covered entity must have a secure network through the life cycle of the network at all time, manage the vulnerabilities, and under Section 6, have process and procedure in place to continue to evaluate what they do under Section 5. So a secure network and evaluate how your security is. So it is a continuous process. The third article that I was mentioning earlier about the obligations under the NIS2 Directive is Article 23, reporting obligations. So each cover entity must notify the local CSIR team or authority and the recipients of their services of any incident with a significant impact on the provision of their services, and must also notify the recipients of the services of any significant cyber threat they are subject and the remedies they have in place to defend against that cyber threat. For what concerns the incidents, the directive provides some guidance on what we can consider as significant impact for an incident, and it has to do with if the incident has a severe operational disruption or financial loss, or is made or is capable of causing considerable material or non-material damage. So what is important to notice here is that the incident has to cause or be capable of causing some adverse effect. So it is also a potential effect on the services. And for what concerns Section 2 here, what I think is interesting is that the directive basically mandates that the covered entity provides some sort of threat intelligence service to the recipient of their services. So basically identifying the threats and explaining how they're going to defend against those threats. As for every directive, the NIS2 directive has some penalties and enforcement. The structure of the penalties is very similar to what we've seen already, for example, under GDPR. So they can be administrative fines of up to 10 million euro or 2% of the company annual global turnover, whichever is higher. There can be suspension of certification or authorization to provide certain services. And as we were saying, there can be personal accountability for senior management. For what concerns the enforcement, the directive identifies there can be on-site inspections, off-site supervisions, and random checks and security scans. At this stage, we haven't seen enforcement yet because we are still at early stage. So it will be important to see how the specific countries receive the directive and start enforcing it, because these fines that we see here and these enforcement methods are kind of the floor, and the specific countries can include other types of enforcement. Looking at the steps to compliance. So the NIS2 directive is no different of any other similar directive that we have seen in the past. So companies that have had compliance journeys for other directives will probably use the same steps that they used before, which are quite standard. So for complying with the NIS2 directive, the first step would be to understand its requirement, the scope and applicability. So an entity must understand if it is subject to the NIS2 directive and what are its requirements. That's the first step. Second step, which for me is quite important, is to assess the current state of their risk and security posture. So this is not the first directive that, or law or regulation that has dealt with security, cybersecurity, data breaches and reporting obligations. So it is likely that many cover entities have already security in place and have already processes and procedures in place. So they shouldn't try to reinvent the wheel, but they should assess what they're already doing, look at their process and procedures, map them against the controls, the requirement of the NIS2 directive, and identify the gaps. Once they have identified those gaps, the next step would be, the third step here, to define the compliance roadmap. So to understand what is the journey, what they need to do in order to plug those gaps and make sure they comply with the directive. And then the following step would be to contact and register with the authorities. This, in my opinion, is key. because, as I was saying, when member states pass local law to implement the directive, they identify the authority that will be responsible for management of the NIS2 directive within the country. And the covered entities will have to register with that authority and then eventually to start communicating with the authority. So, for example, if we look at the example of Italy, which is one of the early adopters of the NIS2 directive, Italy has set up the authority, has set up a way for the entities to register with that authority, and the covered entities must register now with the authority. Once the registration period is over, the authority will start communicating with the entities, will inform them on the bucket that they are included in, and will give them more information on how to report the incidents. And as far as I understand, the obligation to start reporting incidents will start from January 2026. And this is to indicate that the authority itself in Italy needs to ramp up the process and procedures and teams that will receive the notifications, and needs to start establishing a channel of communication with the covered entities before they receive the notification in January. And we can expect similar processes to happen in due course with the remaining member states. Then once that covered entity has registered with the authority, they will need to implement the controls, start the communication with the authority, start reporting of the incidents, and then basically the last step is the usual rinse and repeat. They will need to keep monitoring and their posture, keep evaluating and evolving their posture together with the cyber threats, and basically make sure that their network is up to date with security.
I think you have simplified the way organizations needs to be, or the covered entity needs to be thinking about NIS2. And one comment you made is this is not their first attempt at any regulation. They may have done work on GDPR. They may be complying with PCI and several other regulations. But one thing that I have identified with NIS2 is the number of covered entities have increased significantly compared to the NIS1 regulation. And while some of the entities are quite mature and sophisticated in the way they handle regulations, you take the example of banking. Banking has been governed and regulated from Genesis. You look at healthcare, the type of record they are dealing with, they have lots of regulators and regulatory pressures to deal with. But then the NIS2 also brings a lot of new types of entities which may have a lower cybersecurity maturity. So if you look at, for example, a waste management company, cybersecurity is not their top priority. Or if you look at food processing unit, I think they may have had some programs in place. They may have looking at risk management, but that's not the primary driver to run business or drive revenues. So from my perspective, if you're looking into several of those organizations with low security maturity, the first thing that you will see is, in order for them to comply with the regulations, and especially looking at preventing, detecting, responding, and recovering from incidents, they need to take the assistance from a third party, a managed services provider, a security services provider, who can help them through that journey. That's going to be very common, and we'll see more and more adoption of that. But NIS2 also is quite detailed about the use of supply chain, because supply chain does impact your security posture. It brings risk to your business. So I think the key aspect is, how do you create that balance? How do you create the balance of taking the assistance from the experts and implement the controls that you need, versus you are still complying with the regulations and you keep control on your business itself. And I think from a Secureworks point of view, we solve this problem by looking at three different dimensions. One is make sure you're contractually very tight. When you're looking at contracts, the contract should aid to your compliance regime. When you're looking at NIS2, if you're working with organizations like Secureworks, you should be confident that that is going to actually help you with your NIS2 regulations. There are several other provisions that you should be looking at. For example, the contract should have a customer relationship agreement and DPA. DPA itself should be quite clear. It should talk about the minimum security requirements the vendor should provide, and then they should provide some details on how the practices, that cybersecurity practices and policies works. So the contractual framework should be tight. That gives you the assurance that this is helping with your compliance. But then there are certain aspects like, if you are working with a services provider, they are going to provide a platform. The platform itself should be certified. Talking about my experience, we are certifying with ISO 27001. It's quite detailed. We are going through regular audits. Another element that is continuously being used, it's not just the definition of the controls, but it's also how the controls are effective. So we go through a type 2 SOC 2 audit. Quite extensive. It takes months to go through that process, but that ensures that we have a good risk management. We are following that. We have good change control. All the policies and procedures are working as expected. And then in addition to that, any other good cybersecurity organization, you need to look into a range of things. And NIST is a very common framework. COBIT defines how you should govern your IT. And then depending on the type of customers you are serving, like in our case, we work a lot with financial organizations, so likes of FFIC, and going through the regular audits ensures that we have good, robust IT systems and security on back of that. And finally, the solutions that has been offered, there needs to be a level of openness. So you can bring your own environment and security stack, and you have a good control over it. The platform you are working on should have the complete transparency, so you are able to not only look at what the vendor is doing and how they're operating within your environment, how they're identifying incidents, how they're processing through the alerts. You have all the different timestamps, but you have a complete audit trail. And then as you are seeing that there is an increase of use of automation and AI, the platform should always be able to give you access to the experts. So you can understand the risk, you understand the implications, you can get some guidance as well. So I think it's really important to think about this in a way that protect the supply chain you're using, but you're still able to achieve your objectives. So that's one big area of NIS2 that I think many organizations needs to be considering. Another area, Marco, if you go to the next slide, which I think although it may not be new, but quite a challenge for organizations is the reporting obligations. You covered it really well. So this is part of the Article 23, where the covered entity needs to notify about incidents with significant impact. And the significant impact itself is interesting because it could be subjective, but I think the definition that has been given by NIS2 is it has a severe operational or financial loss, as you talked about, as well as material or non-material damage. So as you may have, or as many organizations may have looked into GDPR, there are similar requirements around privacy, but what actually is changed in NIS2 is the notification requirement. So the first thing is there is an early notification within 24 hours. This will allow the authorities to understand what it is, what is happening in your environment, what is causing this. Is it unlawful? Is it malicious act? Is it an insider threat? So that kind of helps them also understand the severity of it. Is it a cross-border impact? Is it something that they need to be working with other member states as well? So that is something that needs to be provided within 24 hours. Doesn't need to have the level of detail. However, the 48 hours following the 24 hours, that is from the original window to the 72 hours, you need to provide a more detailed notification. And that notification needs to talk about the initial assessment. It needs to talk about what is the severity of what you have identified in the incident, what is the impact, and also indicator of compromise. Are there IP addresses? Are there domains? Are there other artifacts that can help the CSIRT of your member state to understand what it is, and may notify the broader community about what that could be. And finally, the last step in the notification process is to go through a final report, which is going to be quite detailed. It should talk about the root cause analysis, what mitigations and steps you have taken, and then again, analyzing the cross-border impact, because this could not be just an isolated incident. Multiple other cover entities may be impacted by that. It could be based on the vertical. It could be based on the industry, the type of business you are. So overall, the reporting obligations are quite significant, Marco, and I think this is not easy to think through and put together. So from a Secureworks point of view, we have multiple ways to our support and cover this. I think one of the things that we do is provide the incident response readiness, which is you have well-defined policies that has been done. These policies are reviewed. These policies are understood, as well as there are defined templates. So, what kind of templates you need to notify for a 24 hours, 72 hours, or a final report. You can actually, if you have the templates already ready, then it's much easier for you to use them for multiple incidents to be reported throughout the year. But not just the readiness. I think the other important aspect is how prepared you are. So one of the things that you talked about in the Article 20, which is the management is responsible for signing off. And not only they're responsible for signing off the risk management policies, but they're also responsible for ensuring the NIS2 implementation. So how do you ensure that the management have got a good understanding? I think things like doing regular tabletop exercises, ensuring that the organization has been prepared to deal with these things on an ongoing basis is important. And then final thing is ongoing testing and validation. So doing things like red team testing, purple team testing, penetration testing, just to make sure the controls are effective, they're working. If you have an incident, you know how to deal with it. You have got good policies and procedures being defined to deal with the media. One of the things that you talked about, which is not only you have to notify the authorities, but one of the things that NIS2 talks about is to provide this information back to the affected consumers as well is important. So I think those kind of things needs to be predefined, which makes things much easier. So having external support and getting these things ready and regularly tested is something that is absolutely required to be comfortable in meeting the requirements that are defined in NIS2. The last thing, Marco, that I would like to kind of emphasize from a complexity point of view is, if you go to the next slide, is how the NIS2 requirements are not just limited to your IT, but also talks about physical. So, and the term that is used by some of the industry experts is cyber physical, where you are also talking about OT, operational controls. If you look at the covered entities, it's quite a broad scope, and you have multiple of the organizations, whether you look at the energy sector, whether you're looking at healthcare, whether you're looking at manufacturing, they have large amount of systems that are covered under the OT scope. Now, from a maturity point of view, IT is usually more mature. You have more controls, you have more people, more expertise, more knowledge, more support to ensure you have good practices around IT. OT has always that has a greater emphasis on safety. So when it comes to these kind of regulations, and when you are looking at improving your cybersecurity, it's quite a complex thing to do. And I think our recommendation usually is to think about how do you bring IT and OT consolidation. So from a regulation point of view, you have to cover both, because both of them introduce risk to your environment and risk to the broader implication that they can create as part of the critical national infrastructure. So the thing that I think is actually quite a benefit for organizations or cover entity to think about is, this is a great time to think about getting the support from their management, build a common governance around the IT OT. So that's going to be helpful, because then you have common practices that you can apply. The IT and OT teams are usually quite separate and they have distinct function. This may be a good way to bring them together to start thinking about how you can have a more combined, better together operating model. And as you are going to bring things together, then thinking about optimization and also a factor that usually is not considered when you are thinking about these regulations is cost reduction. So as you are bringing things together, you may be able to bring resources together, you may be able to bring tool sets, you may be able to bring some policies and simplify the whole operation around your IT and OT. That may streamline and create the operational efficiencies required. From a Secureworks point of view, we do have expertise both in IT and OT, and we do collect information from IT systems and OT systems to provide that data lake. So that data lake just provides the combined consolidated view on all the information, whether it's events, investigations, alerts. It also gives you a view, because if you look at the attacks on the OT environment, majority of them are coming from IT. So you can see what was the root cause and where it started. So it helps with the incident notification. But then as you go through the processes, there are distinct processes that may be used when you're looking at triage, when you're looking at remediation, as you're looking at corrective measures that may be quite different. So from support that you're getting from organizations like Secureworks, it's really important that you have the level of OT expertise, you have a triage that can help you to understand the root cause and then take corrective actions. So I think thinking this through is quite important, especially the scope is going to be broad and it will cover OT. But I know, Marco, you have been working with a lot of organizations who have got both IT and OT. What are you seeing from the regulations, and what are you seeing from the market?
Yeah, let's say the two-steps approach. One is an approach that we have seen for a long time now. So looking at security and cybersecurity, companies want to go back to basics and look at the management of data. So how data is collected, transferred, processed, and stored, and the security that it's around that. So that is, let's say, the first more traditional approach. What needs to introduce is, as you were pointing out, is slightly different and over and above that. So we're not just talking about that. We're talking about resiliency of a company. If we look at some of the indications that came out on how to define an incident with significant impact, and it goes about the provision of the services. So there was an implementing act that was issued by the European Commission on the 17th of October 2024 that provides more information on how to define a significant impact and what technical measures to take. And that implementing act applies mostly only to digital service providers, but it is indicative. So, for example, if a digital service provider has an incident that caused them a financial loss of $500,000 or 5% of their annual turnover, that is a significant impact. If a digital service provider is down, the services are down for more than 30 minutes, that is a significant impact. So even if there is no exfiltration of IP or of data, it is a reported incident, and the companies need to basically be prepared to avoid those incidents. So it is a new approach whereby even if data is not affected, and the incident must be reported. So the security and cybersecurity needs to prevent that. So it is something. We are at the beginning of a new journey. But yes, the merger of IT and OT and cyber incidents affecting data or cyber incidents affecting availability or financial is coming out within this directive. So this is, let's say, a shift in the approach.
Excellent. Moving to the next slide, which is the final slide. So Secureworks does have a broader portfolio. Here we are showing the example of Article 21, which talks about the risk management measures, and we have taken some examples and mapping them to some of the services and capabilities that we offer. I think today I'm not going to go through each and every one of them, but just to give some examples, the things that we have not talked about, for example, identity threat detection and response. One of the requirements, Marco, that you talked about is the importance of the two-factor authentication. But I think it goes broader because when you're looking at cybersecurity, identities plays a big role. What access you have, how that access can be exploited. What can you do to go away from just the simple static passwords? Can you kind of have a more robust mechanism? Can you monitor them? Can you understand if users are being compromised? So it's important to go and think about this, not just purely from a regulation point of view, but this is a great way for you to improve your overall cybersecurity capabilities as well. Similarly, I think when you're thinking about vulnerability detection and response, scanning the environment, understanding the number of vulnerabilities keeps on going and becoming higher and higher. How do you make sure that you are streamlining them, you are identifying the criticalities and severity, and on top of that, you have got effective remediation plans backed by internal SLAs and KPIs, so you have a good control over that. So there are a number of those capabilities that we can offer, and we can support the organization on their NIS2 journey. The goal today was to just give a high-level view and look at more complex areas and just provide some guidance on how you should be approaching and thinking about complying with NIS2. This is coming really fast, and we are excited to support you and help you through that journey.
Thank you very much, Ritesh. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you both for that. The questions that I have, how should CISOs approach the NIS2 directive?
In my opinion, chief security officers should look at the NIS2 directive as most things in life, as a challenge and an opportunity. A challenge, of course, because they must implement new security measures, report requirements, and they need to carry out and provide training. So they have more things to do. But also as an opportunity, because when I speak to CISOs across Europe, one of their main issues, sometimes the main issue, is to convince their own management in investing in cybersecurity and in setting up a culture of cybersecurity. So in my opinion, with the NIS2 directive now, when a CISO walks into a boardroom and speaks to the board of directors and asks, for example, for budget for implementing security measures and implementing, as I was saying, a culture of cybersecurity, it will, of course, describe let's say, the downsides of being exposed or being breached. But then if also can convey the message that if the requirements of this directive are not complied with, the management of the company will be held personally liable. That, in my opinion, is a pretty strong argument that will help CISOs across the industry in convincing that having a good cybersecurity measure is important.
These types of directives are coming from a place of concern, and so organizations really do need to recognize that this is not something that's going to go away. They need to lean into it. They need to start to deal with it, and they need to start to deal with it at the highest levels and work their way right down through the organization to be completely compliant. I'm going to ping pong back and forth because I got several questions. This one's for Ritesh. With regard to, so we just talked about CISOs, how about with regard to board and senior management? What's the best way to educate these types of folks in the organization?
So the regulation itself has made it super easy because Article 20 talks about senior management accountability. So they are actually responsible not only for signing off those risk management policies, but they are also responsible for overseeing the overall implementation. So they cannot run away from this. They absolutely have to go and be behind this initiative. So that's one thing that makes it easier. Another thing that we have seen is when we are trying to educate, it's very important to do that in a really practical way. So we do a lot of tabletop exercises where we can look into how a threat actor may approach things like ransomware, how they are going to impact the organization, and how do you get prepared. So anything that is done on a more practical level gives the senior management the real visibility they need to be prepared. And on top of that, I think we in cybersecurity makes everything much more complex. So providing the metrics that is easy to understand and the way we are approaching to solve problems, if we can make this in the way senior management can understand the business language, makes things much easier as well. So there are a number of ways to do that, and we are constantly advising the organization on how to do that.
Well, Marco, given what Ritesh just said with regard to responsibility at the senior manager level, I think if I were in senior management, I'd want to know how does Article 2, how does it define who qualifies as senior management?
Well, it's not strictly defined in the directive. So the directive mentions management bodies. So the management bodies are responsible, they have the responsibilities. Under management bodies, for sure, we can assume that boards of directors will absolutely qualify. But also, if we look at C-levels like CEOs and CISOs, if a professional is responsible for implementing cybersecurity measures and or holds the budget for implementing cybersecurity measures, in my opinion, will be considered as a management body and therefore could be held personally liable.
Ritesh, with organizations with limited resources, and again, this is something we see at Solutions Review all the time. You know, there are large companies that have lots of people that can throw a team at compliance, but there are other organizations that are maybe a little less capable of being able to do that. What would you provide for advice with regard for them to have the visibility to prepare themselves for this sort of initiative?
Yeah, Doug, I think one of the most challenging thing is how do you set your 24/7 capabilities, because you need a large team to do that, and there are a number of organizations who provide that. So that's one thing that I would advise. The second thing, which is quite a big liability, is the incident response. How do you notify 24 hours, 72 hours, provide a final report? So working with an incident response partner who can help you with your practices and processes and create templates for you, again, helps quite a lot. So there are a number of organizations who can help support companies with who doesn't have a lot of resources who can do this, would be a good starting point. And as you understand these regulations, as you understand these requirements more and more, you can create efficient processes and you can minimize what is required to get compliant. But one thing that is super important is get your practices. So don't focus on compliance, focus on good cybersecurity practices, and compliance will automatically follow. That's how I've been advising people for 20 years, and that's what I would say for this too.
Things get complicated when you have affiliates in multiple EU countries. Marco, is it necessary to communicate with all of the local authorities in each of the responsible countries?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, let's look at the jurisdiction. So the directive says that a company is subject to the jurisdiction of the authority in the country where the company is established. So if we follow that, if a company is established in multiple countries, it will be subject to the jurisdiction of the authorities in each country. There are exceptions to this. So, for example, digital service providers, such as managed service providers, managed security service providers, are subject to the jurisdiction of the authority where they have their main establishment. And we could discuss how to define main establishment. So, but this is the jurisdiction. For what concerns instead the communication of incidents with significant impact, the NIS2 directive basically mandates that the member state set up a single point of contact within their authority, and that single point of contact will be responsible for communicating with the covered entities, but also to communicate with other authorities. And also the NIS2 directive explicitly mandate the member states simplify the reporting of incidents through this single point of contact through their own authority. So we have so the single point of contact should operate as a liaison between authorities. So this leads us to believe that the structure that ultimately will be put in place will be similar to what we have under GDPR, with a lead authority taking the lead on communication of an incident and then liaising with the other authorities. This is, let's say, the direction that the NIS2 directive gives to the member states. But of course, we have to wait that member states implement, each member state implements the directive, set up the authorities, the single point of contact, and start identifying how they will liaise with each other.
Marco, I just want to hang with you because there is some nuance here with regard to essential entities and important entities. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the key distinctions are between those two entities?
Yeah, we discuss in which type of sectors the essentially important entities operate. But for what concerns the implementation of this directive, there are a few key distinctions, but the most important, in my opinion, is that for what concerns essential entities, there will be proactive supervision. And for what concerns important entities, there will be reactive supervision. This means that essential entity will proactively be supervised, so there will be those checks and balances that we were discussing earlier, even if there is no incident. Important entities instead will be investigated if they report an incident. But of course, this shouldn't be interpreted as an incentive not to report anything, meaning I don't report anything, they will never look at me, because it is reasonable to foresee that if there are several important entities that in an industry that report incidents, and one entity in the same industry doesn't, probably that will raise suspicions and could trigger an investigation. So that is, in my opinion, the main difference. Then, of course, there are some other differences. So the penalties will be stricter, and action to take remedies will be stricter for essential entities. And also the penalties will be higher for essential entities. So we said that the cap for essential entities is the greater of 10 million euro and 2% of global turnover. And for important entities is 7 million euro, 1.4%. So those are the main differences, in my opinion.
Well, thank you for that. The last question I have really revolves around, I guess, recommendations, right? Ritesh, I'll start with you. What are, with regard to cyber hygiene practices, I mean, what would you recommend people start thinking about in 2025 as they prepare and get everything sorted out for this compliance issue?
Doug, nothing has changed in the last decade in terms of hygiene. Get the basics right. First thing is education. So you need to make sure your employees and senior management is educated. I think sophistication of attacks is increasing because of AI. So you can have much more sophisticated phishing emails, which is hard to detect. So there is a level of sophistication, but the solutions are also improving. But get the basics right, make sure there is proper education across the organization. NIS2 focuses quite a lot on that. That's one part of it. The other part of the basic is identity and access management. Make sure you have two-factor authentication, you have good monitoring controls, you are understanding who can access, what they can access. And there are a number of solutions that allows you to monitor that, and there are processes that you can implement. We are seeing time after time that there are vulnerabilities that are not being patched for a long time, that the threat actors are taking advantage of. That having a solution that not only identifies the vulnerabilities, but also provide you a clear recommendation and a remediation policies is quite important for you. So just get the basics right, and then I think majority of the things in NIS2 will fall into places. One last thing is work with a cybersecurity partner who is competent. They can help you through that journey, as we talked about. I think is quite important as well. But I think nothing fancy. Just get the basics right, and that will lead you to the path of compliance.
Yeah, Marco. I mean, just to kind of put a bow on it, just to go for a broader perspective. Everybody has something. Everybody thinks they're protecting themselves the best that they can. But yet, these types of initiatives or directives are really designed to almost flinch organizations to make sure that they really truly re-look at their security posture. Secureworks is obviously a leading cybersecurity provider. Just from a more, like I said, a broader perspective, what advice would you provide for folks to just, as they think about, you know, the more advanced cybersecurity attacks that are happening, the ransomware that's becoming more sophisticated? What would you offer for advice with regard to thinking about what they have in place and what they might want to move toward to make sure that they are as protected as possible?
Yeah, to be honest, I intend to say everything Ritesh said, but what I would add to that is, as you were mentioning, these directives help people think about it. So my advice would be, engage with this directive and use it to foster a culture of cybersecurity, and that goes from the top of the company to every employee. And by doing that and going back to the basics that Ritesh was mentioning, in my opinion, a company can find itself in a good place.
Actually, I have one more question, which is kind of a nuanced question, but companies operating in the EU, but their main establishment is located in the UK. Are they required to be compliant under this NIS2 directive?
Yes, if they're operating in the EU, they are required to comply. So if a company has no presence in the EU, but is providing services, no affiliates in the EU, but is providing services, cover services into the EU, needs to establish a representative in the EU and comply with the directive and be under the jurisdiction of the authority in the country where the representative is established. So companies in the UK, but also from all over the world. This would apply to companies from all over the world.
Well, there you go. Once again, I think the EU is leading the world in terms of pushing these sorts of directives, compliance issues. Really, I think, you know, with GDPR and now NIS2, it's you have to pay attention, and I think there is a real need to focus in on cybersecurity specifically, and so I think this initiative is timely, and again, I think everybody should be taking it completely seriously. We appreciate the presentation today, very detailed. It's so detailed, in fact, that if you want to watch it again, we're going to make it available on our YouTube channel. We're certainly going to present it to anybody who wants it. If you've been a part of this registered attendance, we'll send it out as well. But we'll make it available permanently on our YouTube channel because it's going to be relevant for some time now. Marco, Ritesh, thanks very much for the time and the great information, and best of luck with all of your work over the next year.
Thank you very much, Doug.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate it.
So there you have it, another solution in our spotlight. We want to thank Marco and Ritesh and Secureworks for that presentation, and we appreciate your attendance as well. Until next time, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thanks for watching.
If your business would like to be featured in a future event, contact us today.